Good evening. Thank you, Bodhinaga. Can you hear? Thumbs up? Yeah, thumbs up. Great. My journey into Right Livelihood, in a way, it started very simply and very suddenly. The event that sort of led me to review my working life was a retreat in the early 90s at Vajraloka. So I was in my 30s. I was running an international group. I was living in Derbyshire, and I'd gone on retreat for a week, which already felt quite a provocative and controversial thing to do, given all the demands that I felt were on my shoulder. Anyway, I found myself at Vajraloka, and it was really interesting because I deeply knew I'd found my spiritual home, and I'd become immersed in something that was just so vital and so important for me, and something I'd been looking for all my life. And at the same time, I was tortured with feelings of guilt and uselessness, you know, sat on this cushion with all these things to be done. I was very pleased with myself as a meditation interview when I managed to name this as doubt and indecision. So there I was at Vajraloka, having a really significant week, as many early retreats can be. And retreats are sort of 10 steps forward, 9 steps back in time. Eventually it becomes 9 steps back, has been my discovery. But anyway, I go back to work and I'm in my 10 steps forward phase. Knowing a few things had shifted. And what happened was one of my closest colleagues came into my office. He actually came to have a complaint about another close colleague. And one of the things I'd seen on this retreat, that I had a habitual pattern of trying to fix this. You know, I'd sort of be the intermediary and I'd go along and try and fix it. And I hadn't worked out until that retreat that always made things worse, not better. I'd sort of seen this amongst other things. Anyway, my colleague comes into my office and comes out with his usual complaint about my colleague. And I don't think I said anything. I may have said a few words, but I don't actually remember saying anything. I just gave him a look where he knew that I knew that he knew that it was over, and there was no point coming to me anymore and treating me like a clockwork orange and winding me up to go and fix these problems. And it was very interesting because that particular pattern or dynamic, I'm not sure that ever occurred again. Sometimes transitions aren't as dramatic as that, but I'm not sure that event happened again. Anyway, what it illustrated to me was that through greater awareness on my part, something significant and necessary transformed in the organization. It was as simple as that. And I don't have much organizational theory, but one theory I do trust in is a thing called parallel process, that the behaviors within a leader or a leadership team subtly get reflected throughout an organization or an institution or an organization. So for a whole variety of reasons, it was quite a scary thing to do, but I sort of left my mini empire over the next year or two, wanting to pursue that insight, you know, not really being entirely clear if this was possible on behalf of other organizations, but just really trusting in that principle that awareness is transformative. And if you work with leaders and leadership teams, actually the effects can be quite significant. So that was the thing I trusted in. I also wanted to give more time and have more freedom for formal practice. I wanted to get ordained, and I wanted to be free to give time to our Sangha. And none of these things were possible to any great extent with the demands I had on me. So anyway, I left. another thing that drove me is I've always been a very I've had a passionate interest, and I'm a great admirer of healthy enterprise and engineering, which is my background. I mostly worked with engineering companies because I think some of the great breakthroughs in terms of removing elementary suffering come from enterprise and engineering, things like safety engineering, clean water, sewage. So there's just something that's really, really important in a healthy society for me. So that was one reason I actually love and value enterprise. I also admire most leaders because it's quite, it's sort of easy to be an armchair critic, but actually when you find yourself in a position of responsibility, it's often more difficult than it looks. And my experience is most people who are trying to do something actually have been brave enough to take on responsibility. And funnily enough, I did a piece of training in America, and we were looking at systems, and it turned out, I won't go into all the details, it would take too long. It turned out that the most painful, frightening place is the place of leadership. It can look like people with responsibility have all sorts of privileges, etc. But actually, it can be a place of very great suffering if you take responsibility, if you see accurately what you're responsible for. So anyway, for all these reasons, I made it my life for the next 20 years to work freelance in these environments. I was trying to think, what can I share? What could I share in terms of the essence of the work? Well, I just relied on quite simple models, like if you are aware, if you have a good presence in a conversation, that in itself can have some consequences. I also, I'm a great fan of the threefold path, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. So that's just simply ethics, awareness, and wisdom or clarity. And always looking for ways of bringing in Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. But remember, most of the places I work, I'd work mostly with chief execs or boards of directors or leadership teams. It is the Titan realm. So in general, I didn't ever think they were looking for lectures on compassion. They were more interested in clarity and thinking skills and seeing clearly. And I also developed a number of ways of communicating Dharmic principles. Anxiety is quite a big thing for people in organizations. So I'll give you an example. It was Vajradaka, I think, who brought this particular way of teaching to me. I'd talk about aiming to be like a bell. A bell doesn't ring until it's hit. It doesn't ring before it's hit. And after a few seconds, it doesn't ring after it's hit. And I would use this metaphor for talking about the human tendency to anticipate and start ringing before we were hit, and then to sometimes spend days or weeks cogitating and reflecting on what happened when we were hit. So a human is capable of ringing for months when a bell only rings for a few seconds. So I worked out ways of communicating Dharmic principles. And just before I came on tonight, I remembered that somebody had made a note of all these and sent me 3 pages, and I didn't even remember most of the ones I'd said. So in terms of the effectiveness of the work, I also asked myself when I was preparing this, well, how effective have I been? And the honest answer is it's very, very difficult to say. I've been disappointed that more people I've worked with haven't taken to the Dharma formally. But without making excuses, I think that might have something to do with the Titan realm, and have something to do with similar to that young man myself in the 90s, being racked with guilt, going on retreat. But I've some evidence to believe that things I don't remember saying actually became quite pivotal insights and teachings. Also, whilst we're talking about my work and the success of it, I just want to credit and thank Bodhinaga, who accompanied me for a while and kept, it actually helped me bring some focus to some of the work I was doing. So that was a really rich period. I'll just finish by saying that latterly, my work has moved. I don't really work one-to-one in the same way. My work has moved to policy decisions, and finding organizational solutions is extremely difficult in practice, actually. My experience of most people I work with is that they've got very good intentions and they care about things that are important. But it is so easy with policies to make things worse rather than better. You know, organizations are very, very complex. So the last 2 or 3 years have been about really bringing more wisdom and clarity to a prediction of what are the consequences going to be of these decisions and these outcomes. So I can honestly say I've never been more enthusiastic about my life. It's been about my working life. It's an area of huge interest and curiosity, because the karmic consequences of leaders making serious errors, I think this is solid dharma. Actually, the more responsibility we have, the more karmic consequences for our behavior and our actions. So I really feel for people in positions of responsibility that actually it takes a lot of courage, and to do it well. There's well, what you know, I just have really wanted to help in that area. I think that's most of what I wanted to say, except to point out that I've been talking about paid work, and in my own head I don't differentiate between paid and unpaid work. And actually, I regard the whole of my life, without exception, as work, and I love work. And amongst my more meaningful and satisfying pieces of unpaid work has been the Sheffield Buddhist Centre as a building, the women's community, some contributions to Adhisthana. Why I mention that is that for me, work is actually the deepest pleasure. I want to work till I die, using work in that sense. And some of the skills that I've developed in my career, of course, I've been able to bring them to the Sangha. I'll just finishing by mentioning something that was shared with me that moved me to tears. You know, maybe you're surprised to hear me say I want to work, you know, right to my last day. But I learned recently that Sangharakshita, on the day he died, or the day before, was making an effort to respond to Sangha letters, to communications from people in the Sangha, against the advice and the request of his closest friends. You know, there was a moment where he acknowledged that he could not continue with that. It wasn't possible, and he was within hours of death, it turned out. But I thought that was very interesting and very revealing, that that importance was placed on that work in the biggest sense, that work of Sangharakshita. Thank you.
Great, hello. Thank you, Achara. So, yeah, I'm going to be sharing some of my experiences of how my work has been transformed in line with my vision, and sharing a few points for reflection as well. So for those that don't know me, I work as an optometrist. I work at a lovely opticians in the town centre part-time. And I've always really enjoyed my work because it's always been a good opportunity to help people. I've always really enjoyed the kind of the mechanics of it, the science of it, the medicine of it, but particularly connecting to people. And I've noticed in recent years, the emphasis from my work has really shifted more and more that way, much more towards connecting to people and towards different ways of expressing kindness in that environment. So that's a lot of what I'll be talking about. And this year is the first year I've ever had a career break. You know, I've done the classic school, uni work, and then just working continually. But because of lockdown, I was furloughed. So it was the first chance I've ever had, really, just to have some solid time off of work. And I noticed really early on, stopping work quite suddenly like that, that work actually gave me a really easy sense of meaning. Like, it was really easy to tap into every week. And suddenly having that gone, it was gone. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to delve much more deeper into meaning. So that was a really good practice for me in that time. And then I've been back at work now for, I think, about 4 months. And it is really nice to see a subtle shift in my behaviours and like my sort of inner world when I'm working. So what I've moved from is my work giving me meaning to me bringing my sense of meaning to work. So there's been a shift there. And for me, being a force of kindness and love in the world is part of my myth and my meaning. So it's a real joy to sort of bring that with me to work every day, and to let that have an effect on the people I encounter. So I really like the idea of bringing the precepts to work with you. So you could do this in all sorts of ways. I'm quite visually imaginative. So the way I would do this is literally conjure up an image of bringing the precepts to work with me, almost in like a little basket. And letting them accompany me during the day, so letting them just sort of perfume my day and be around me during my work day. Influence your decisions, particularly when difficulties arise, which of course happens all the time. And I thought I'd share 2 stories that highlight 2 examples of this, 2 precepts where they've really influenced my behaviour at work, and particularly in really different ways to how I would have been a few years ago in really similar situations. So the first story is around the precept of kindness. So it was, I think, at the start of this year, I was doing an eye test for a really lovely older lady I hadn't met before. And as I say, I, as much as I can, a practice for me is to really connect to people, and because it's so easy, I think, to get wrapped up in one's mind, but I really try and sort of bring myself in and connect. And I could see there was like a bit of a barrier. And what became more obvious as we discussed things more, and her sort of body language and her almost her demeanour, was something we talked about. Is she has a birthmark near her eye. And as the eye test went on, I realised, oh, this has a huge effect on her, like more than I would have expected, because she was such a lovely lady. And of course, I think for a lot of people, going into a medical environment is nerve-wracking. It certainly is for me. So part of what I really want to do is put people at ease, if possible, in that environment. And I think not only was it a medical environment, it was an eye test, and this is the area that causes her an issue. So my heart really broke for her, because I could see her sort of anxiety really shooting up. And there was one point where she just sort of had to get up and go look into the mirror, and she called herself a leper, which really broke my heart. Oh, and it gave me a glimpse into the world that her mind had created. And I thought, oh, she was born with this. How many years has this been the world she's been living in, that she thinks people are, repulsed by her? And I wasn't at all. And I think in the past, something that emotionally intense, I would have shied away from in some way, because I would be worried about saying the wrong thing, or maybe making it a bit worse and bringing more attention to something that she's self-conscious about. But actually, I knew what my intention was, and I could be behind it. So I just talked to her. I just said, well, I just want to share my point of view on it, and just said a little bit about how lovely I thought she was, and I don't think people would really notice it actually day to day, and just shared with her talked a little bit about how much these things in our minds are much worse than anyone else ever notices, and we all have these things about ourselves. So it was quite an intense encounter, and then she left. We finished her eye test, and then I was just in my room, and she popped back in quite a bit later. She'd been in the practice choosing her glasses and that kind of thing. And when I saw her again, she looked so different. She was much, much lighter. That barrier that I had been perceiving was just gone. And I think we'd really connected. And that was the most important thing of that whole eye test, was actually the human connection. And she just came back just to sort of thank me and go. But it just really stayed with me, that story. And that lady, she's really stayed with me. So that's the sort of example where it's like, oh, that little kindness pal is like, what could you do here to make a bit of a difference? And then this is a bit of a different story. My next story is around the precept of truthfulness. So this happened when I had gone back to work after lockdown, and I'd had some clinic time blocked out to sit with a sales rep about a particular, like a bit of kit, basically, a bit of optical kit, which is fine. I love learning new things, so that's fine. But I found this person quite difficult and very salesy and bolshy and quite arrogant. That's how I perceived this person. And I was finding it frustrating because I really wanted to learn in that opportunity. So I was asking questions and they were just being very much, it's hard to describe how it went, but basically he was pretending to know the answers and saying sort of baloney. And I was finding that really frustrating. And then it was happening again and again. And then I thought, well, it's just been lockdown. So maybe I have met him before, but maybe he's particularly nervous. And the way his nervousness is being expressed is this kind of like quite bizarre interaction. And I just thought, again, in the past, I would have just sort of almost gone along with it and thought, oh, this is just really awkward and no one's getting anything out of this, him or me. But I would have just sort of sat through this awkward, painful interaction. But actually what I did in this occasion was I just said to him, it's okay, you don't have to pretend to know these things. Like, you can just say you don't know, like, I don't mind, which I don't think is the kind of expression he'd get back at any point in the kind of life he lives, which was interesting. And I thought, I'm just going to leave him for a bit and let him have a bit of time, and he can just sort of have a look at some stuff and I'll come back to him. And again, it was just really important to me there that I expressed truthfulness and didn't just go along with this actually and try to make a different set of outcomes come out from that experience. So, a little summary then of a couple of points there is moving from your work giving you meaning to you bringing your sense of meaning to work, because I found that really powerful, and bringing the precepts with you to work and letting them perfume your day. And just to finish, I just want to say one last reflection that I'm currently sort of milling over. Preparing for this, I listened to Bhante give his talk on Right Livelihood, which is on free Buddhist audio in this series of talks. And I think Mike Jassa referenced it last week. Bhante talks about the physical effects our work leave on us, but the far greater effects our work leaves on our minds. And I thought, oh, this is such a good reflection. What toll does my work take on my body, and how then can I better care for my body? And more crucially, what toll does my work take on my mind, and how can I better protect my mind? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pretti and Achara. I've really enjoyed hearing from you both, actually, and I realise I've got to speak now. I've been really absorbed in listening to both of those. So what I think I would like to do is just share a few anecdotes from my experience of working, really, in different ways. So I've worked at the Buddhist Centre for 10 years. Before that, I worked in other Buddhist situations. But prior to that, I worked initially in advertising. That was my kind of career, was in advertising initially when I graduated. So just want to share some anecdotes that will show how my kind of journey with livelihood. So the first story is I was working at Northern Rock Bank in their advertising department in Newcastle. And some people might remember it was when the banking crash happened in about 2008, Northern Rock was one of the first banks to go under. But that wasn't when I was working there. They were doing quite well when I was working there. Yeah, I don't know if I caused it to go down. But basically, I was working in the advertising department, and the one day, the director of advertising called me into his office, and he had a lot of power, a lot of good salary and a lot of influence. And but I remember that I didn't like him, and one of the reasons I didn't like him was basically his ethics. I wasn't impressed by him, but particularly there was a meeting where he really tore me to strips over something. I just wasn't expecting it, and it really upset me. And I don't like this man. But he called me, and that's probably one of the reasons why I wasn't very happy at that time in the job. But he called me into his office and said, "Why are you so unhappy? You seem really unhappy in this job, and this is one of the best jobs in the Northeast. Like you're in one of the best." He said something like one of the best 1% of jobs in the Northeast, and if you play your cards right, and if you wait in the next 10 years, you could be like me. You could be sitting in my chair. You could be like me. And I just remember that was really a significant moment, because I wasn't a Buddhist at that point. I hadn't heard about Buddhism or karma, but I just had this alarm bell went off, said, I definitely don't want to be like you. I definitely don't want to be in 10 years time sitting in your chair like you. That is the last thing that I want. So I kind of knew almost immediately I had to get out of that situation. And in a way, it was a glimpse into ethics and karma before I knew what that was. But as a sense, when we teach karma, you think about the kind of person you want to become, and usually it's a person you admire, and then you work backwards and think, well, how do I need to act now to become like that person? And there's also a glimpse into conditionality, I suppose, as well. Like if I stay in these conditions, in this environment, I might become like this man, and I definitely don't want to become like that. So I left that job, soon after that, and then I had a spell in an advertising agency, which I thought might be more interesting, and I might be able to kind of have more of an impact in some ways. But then another thing happened. One is it became clear to me that it involved lying, telling lies, and I was really uncomfortable with that. It just became clear to begin with. It was fine, and I could go in and I could pretend that this product was interesting, and I could tell my job was to brief the creative people and tell them how it needed to be, how to present it and how the client wanted it to look to their customers. But all along I just knew it's a bit like the emperor's clothes, really. I just thought, well, the emperor's got no clothes on. This product is rubbish, and basically, whatever we do, it'll still be rubbish. And I just felt like deeply uncomfortable with that. And at the same time, I remember I sat in the desk next to me was my manager, and then the desk next to him was his manager. And we're basically, so I got a glimpse again ahead of my future for where if I stayed in that environment, in that job, in a few years' time, I'd be like my manager. In a few years' time after that, I'd be like his manager. And essentially, I could see what my working life was going to be doing the same thing over and over again, like repetitively for 20 years, and just getting kind of more and more stressed and less happy is what it seemed like. That was kind of the vision of the future as I looked along the desks. So again, it didn't, like something internally, I knew I needed to get out of that situation. Circumstances changed in my life. I took a bit of a career break and went traveling. This is when my kind of, when my spiritual life started to open. I started to look for purpose and meaning in life, really. That's what was happening. I came back to Sheffield, and when I came back to Sheffield, which is where I grew up, I came to an introductory course, and that obviously had a massive effect on my life because of what you can see what the difference it's made and what I'm doing now. So I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But I also then, at the same time, started a business with a school friend. That was one thing I hadn't tried, I hadn't career-wise. I always had this nagging sense that maybe if I owned my own business, I could shape it to be more how I wanted it to be, it'd be more fulfilling. So I started a business and with my school friend, but yeah, after a while, again, the ethics of it just kind of, the ethics of that world, that environment just didn't sit comfortably with me. And again, it was a retreat. I remember going on a retreat led by Bodhinaga at Padmaloka on the Bodhisattva ideal, on the Bodhicaya of Achara, and just having this sense of a different vision actually arising for what my life could be about. And it was a vision of service. I had this sense I wanted to serve. And what I wanted to serve was, if I could, the Dharma and the three jewels in quite a direct way. Anyway, what I wanted to do was, at that point, work alongside Vedanya. That's kind of what I had in mind, but it didn't happen. I mean, it did happen, but not immediately. So what the next thing that happened actually was I met Achara, and he talked about this when, I ended up working for Achara for a little while. And I look back at the time now with my business partner. I used to be quite angry at the way, the ethics around me leaving my business. Anyway, I left my business and left behind the kind of my shares in it and the kind of its value and, the finances. And I was unhappy with my business partner about how that worked out. But when I look back, it must have been quite hard for him as well, because we'd started this business together. And then I came in one day and told him I was going to be a secretary for Achara. So, I'd kind of gone from running this business with him to then part-time working in the business and part-time becoming Achara's secretary. And that came about because I'd heard about Buddhists spending time working together and kind of learning from each other. And I'd met Achara and I thought, I really want to learn from Achara. And I remember speaking to Mogavamsa, and the idea came, well, maybe I could see if he's got any jobs, if maybe I could work for him. So I remember asking Achara, have you got any jobs? Can I work for you? And he said, well, I'm looking for a secretary at the moment. So after a brief conversation, I became his secretary. And for a number of years, really, really enjoyed spending time with Achara. Anyway, the work, I didn't care about the work. It was like, I enjoyed helping Achara. But it was just being able to spend time in his company, which was really valuable to me, and watching him getting stuff reflected back to me about myself. I learned so much. And then I tried lots of also other Buddhist teams. I worked in the evolution shop with Maitridasa, Mokshitara, Dhyavajra, Dharmamaya, lots of others. Basically, essentially selling wind chimes and like pretty rubbish gifts, if I'm honest. But just this fantastic environment of working with people who had the same values as me, whose life was about the same thing as me, and would support me to change. They wanted me to grow and would support me to grow. So it was really, and also Dharma Maya and I set up a school, Buddhist kind of business called Still Learning, where we do school workshops about Buddhism, and that was wonderful as well. But for the last 10 years, I've worked in the Buddhist Centre directly, which in a way was from that retreat what I kind of knew I wanted. I remember getting a phone, after I'd been invited to be ordained, getting a phone call from Sumati saying, would you like to work at the Buddhist Centre? I remember just saying, oh, that would be my dream. That would be my dream job. So for the last 10 years, that's what I've done. And I'm aware of the time, but I wanted just to I wanted to talk about service. I wanted to talk briefly about service. And it's funny when you work with Buddhists, it can be wonderful, and it can, I consider it's a real blessing. I feel so blessed and so lucky to be able to work with Buddhists. And at the same time, it can be really hard as well at times, because there's nowhere to hide. And I try and explain this to my wife. She's got a really pressured job as a senior doctor. But sometimes it's really hard. It doesn't seem hard to her what I do. But sometimes it is really, really challenging. And part of what it is, we don't wear any masks or any armor, so we're kind of completely open with each other about how we are, what's going on. We don't hide anything from each other. So, if you're at your best, that's great. You get really inspired by each other. But if you're at your worst, you can you get seen at your worst by your colleagues. And also, if you disagree with each other, you're kind of forced to sort it out, to work it out, because of you're committed to something bigger than the job in a way. So there's a time where I got my dream to work alongside Vedanya, and then I can see Vedanya on the screen. But after a couple of years, it wasn't going very well, because I started to change. I was involved with the Dharma, and I started to change, and all this kind of blocked anger started to kind of come out, and resentment, and poor old Vedanya kind of, I started to project this onto him a bit. And so our relationship became quite frosty for quite a while, and we used to clash and we used to disagree. And so it's really painful for a while, actually, for both of us. And but what switched it, a couple of things switched it around. One was table tennis. We discovered that if we played table tennis together after a meeting, it completely changed the dynamic. We could just smack the ball really hard at each other, and then just be really delighted and kind of give each other a big hug. So sometimes table tennis seemed really important. And then the other thing was a conversation with Padmavajra, who's the president of our centre. I remember saying to him, just talking about this dynamic, and Padmavajra just saying, have you considered serving Vedanya and Suyamati, who was the chair at the time? Have you considered serving them? And it was really a really significant comment, but also it wasn't what I wanted to hear, because we weren't getting on at the time, and it just felt really, really uncomfortable, that idea. But then I also knew it was what I needed to do. In a way, it was very humiliating, because there was a lot of my ego. I wanted to serve the Buddhist Centre, but my ego was in the way, and this kind of all this anger and resentment was in the way. So suddenly it's kind of switched it on its head, and just the idea of just straightforwardly serving them made life so much easier. And so I just, that dynamic shifted almost straight away, just this idea that I could not, instead of being interested in myself, just be interested in them. What could I do to help them? What could I do to help, in a way, to serve the situation, to serve the Sangha? And in a way, just to finish, what I discovered is that, in a way, what I long to do and what I feel really fortunate to be able to do here is to serve not just the people I'm working with and working for, but something bigger than that still. I feel like it's an opportunity to serve the members of the Sangha, or the people of the Sangha who make up this wonderful community, but also something bigger than that, which is the Dharma and the Buddha and the Bodhicitta, this kind of how to sum this up in 30 seconds to finish the talk. In a way, for me, what gives real meaning to my work and my life is the idea that I'm helping to create the conditions for the Dharma to be alive in the world. That's how I'd sum it up. For the Dharma to be alive in the world, and for Sangharakshita's Dharma to be alive in the world. And that is something I really want to serve. That's something I really want to give my life to. So in a way, I get paid expenses, I get paid a kind of support for doing what I do, but it doesn't feel, like Achara said, it doesn't feel like my life is work. It's kind of what I would be doing anyway, really. And so I think that's the best approach you can have to it. If you're lucky enough to be able to do a job that you would do anyway and doesn't feel like work, then you're very fortunate. I count myself to be very fortunate. So I'll stop there. Thank you.